artist. This is an exhibition of my work in here. When it opened 3-4 weeks ago, I gave a talk right out here. Is that not loud enough?
That's
Is that better?
great.
Okay. And I was looking right over there where Mark was sitting, and I noticed his face was very animated. He was really responding to what I was talking about. So especially when I started talking about space, because he was able to relate to the concept of space in painting to what he does as a musician. And we got to talking, and we decided to do this talk, which we kind of sort of rehearsed, but we haven't really gotten together and said, okay, you do this, I'll do that. The idea is for us to blend what we are about, music and art, in one presentation, which was going to include Mark playing when he feels so moved, and I will walk you through some images that will tell you something about what I do every day in my studio as a painter. I was in my studio yesterday. My studio is in Crestone, which is about 4 hours away. And I was having my coffee. I was looking through a book about the history of art, which I do a lot. And how many of you are familiar with the painter Kandinsky? Great. Okay, well, Kandinsky in about 1911 went to a concert. And the concert was by a composer who was very controversial at the time because he was really departing from the normal, well-known way of making music. And Kandinsky was completely taken with his music. And as he was listening to his music, he saw colors. He saw shapes. And he rushed back to he was in his 20s and he had not yet decided he was going to be an artist. He was interested in art, he was interested in painting, and that's unusual for a great painter like Kandinsky to be sort of in that deciding mode when he's in his early 20s. He went back to his new studio and started painting some of his most well-known pieces that were influenced by Schoenberg, the composer. And in those pieces, he felt like he was painting music. The colors, the yellows, the greens, the blues, to him, he could hear them. So he had that characteristic, I think they call it synesthesia, where you actually hear a piece of music and see a color or a shape. But he had it to the nth degree, and we all know, the rest is history. His works are in museums all over the world. And I thought about Mark, and I thought about his reaction to my referring to space in a painting. My intention today really is to make what I do and what we do more accessible, more available, which I try to do every day in my blog. I have a daily blog, philiptarlow.com, where I just talk about what's going on in my studio, the process of creating paintings, which there's some little illustrations that you can pass around there that show the development of a painting from day one to the final painting. And in this case, particularly one of them, you can see that what it started out as is very different from what it ended up as. And you wonder, well, how the hell did that happen? And I wondered the same thing, because I finished painting for the day, I come to my studio, and I take a look at what I did yesterday, and I said, no way, I'm painting over that. Now, some people, including Michaela, might look at it and say, don't paint over that. Are you crazy? That's beautiful. You can't paint over that, but I do. But I leave it transparent enough, like you can see in some of the paintings in here, where you can see what was going on underneath. because I'm a very strong believer in this whole idea of process. Everything is process and everything is creative, and you might not look at your life that way, but when you get up in the morning and you make coffee or whatever it is you do when you get up, that is a process, and that can be, and should be really, and is a creative process. You learn things every day. You make slight changes. I mean, I grind the beans, I roast the beans, I order the beans, I decide which, and there's so many variables that it can never be the same cup of coffee. Well, I think that's the coolest thing in the world, and that's the way my work is, and that's the way this collaboration is. We don't know. He might start playing, you know, like right now. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just to give you an idea, I'm standing in the studio and I'm making a drawing. It's a drawing in colored pencil, and it's a preparatory drawing for one of the paintings that you see in there. And it's a good example of, you know, this, I think it's a pretty cool drawing, and I could have left it, but I didn't, because I felt like this was an ongoing process and it wasn't complete. Sometimes I do leave it, you know, and so that's a big question. And so another one of these illustrations has to do with when do you stop? And then I am going to stop, and Mark is going to take over. Okay, here we go. So can you see this?
I'm done.
We were in a classroom with 6-year-olds. They were at their easels painting, and there were, you know, like a dozen of them. And one by one, they would put down their brushes and say, "I'm done." And I was like, how do you know you're done? What is that? And that's a big deal for me. When to stop. And so go for it.
All right. So here's the, it's all improv, right? And life is improv. So yeah, this is actually, I'm gonna do a version of the song that I've played with bands. I've played it, you know, solo. Actually, I haven't done a lot of solo. I think the smallest combo. I've done it solo on my porch. And then I've played it with Patrick before, but I've never really played it by myself with a looping machine. But looping machine lets you lay down something, and then it'll loop that thing, whatever that thing is, and then you can continue to kind of add to it. So I thought it seemed like a nice musical analog to the painting, the painting of layers, and leaving layers there and having the layers peek through that Philip was talking about. So here we go. This is called Mitten. Now the pointer finger said to the middle finger, "What are you doing here? Get out of my mitten." Now the middle finger said to the ring finger, "What are you doing here? You get out of my mitten." Now the middle finger, he said to the ring finger, what are you doing here? Get out of my mitt. Now the little finger, he was the littlest finger. That's how he got his name. But the little finger, he was the smartest finger. And he said, all in this together, all in this together, all in this together, all in this together, look sharp. Now the little finger, he was the smartest finger. And we can be like him. We can be like him. All in this together, all in this together, all in this together, all in this together. Sing it now. We're all in this together, all in this together, all in this together, all in this together. Look sharp. Thank you. You haven't heard that song, have you?
I have not heard that song, but I did learn something from you. Stick your nose on the mic, and people can hear you.
Yeah. It gets a little bassier that way.
So, the top image is a plein air painting. Plein air is simply French for open air or outdoor painting. And it was painted in the 19th century. And there were a group of painters who went out together into the landscape. And they had a kind of an unwritten, unspoken, well, it was spoken, but it was unwritten agreement, which was, if you go out and it's a day like this, or whatever kind of day it is, a sunny day, a cloudy day, a windy day, and you're painting that landscape, whatever you do during that period of an hour or two, or however long you're out there, that's it. You don't go back to finish it. So it looks, you see the lower half of the painting, how it's, might call it unfinished. Well, there were lots of these guys. We saw an exhibition in New York of their paintings, and the finest, most beautiful ones were the ones that were half or more unfinished. And so you can see in this, you can see in the paintings inside, especially the watercolors, how that had a profound effect on me, because it wasn't like I learned that you can leave something unfinished. It was that I got confirmation that that was okay from the big boys. So that was one thing. And then where we live, there are numerous creeks. And I go out and I paint plein air at the creek. Now, in the spring in particular, with the spring runoff, it's very loud. You can, I mean, it's like, whoosh, the water is so loud. And through it all, you can hear, or if you go out often enough and sit there long enough, there's nobody there gonna bother me, except the occasional dog, which will jump on me. You can hear the rocks. Now you might think, whoa, Philip is going off the deep end here. You can hear the rocks, because the rocks, as you might suspect, are living beings as well. They're just a little older than us. So what I do when I paint out there is my inspiration for a lot of what you see in there. These were painted in my studio, but what I do when I'm out at the creek is inspired by the sound of the water, the movement of the water. You could even say I'm painting sound, you know? And I'm painting movement, which is something I didn't do earlier in my career. Everything that I painted was pretty much static. So I've learned a huge amount from just going out to that creek and sitting there and painting. And it's a you know, it's not easy. You know, you have to have all your equipment. You have to have a table. You have to have, if you're using gouache colors, they dry within 10 minutes in the breeze and in the sun. And so you have to, you know, it's tricky. And so the process of creating anything, I think, whether, like I said earlier, it's your morning coffee or whether it's a painting or a piece of music. I was on a ferry boat from Yugoslavia to Greece many years ago, and there was a beautiful young girl who I struck up a conversation with, and then the boat docked, and we're getting off the boat. We're waiting for them to give us our passports back that they had stamped because we were coming into Greece. And she says, oh, I want you to meet my dad. And he comes up and shakes my hand and says, pleased to meet you, in a British accent. My name is Henry Moore.
Oh, no. Oh, gosh.
And I was speechless, of course. What followed, and the reason I'm telling you this story, is that we spent 3 or 4 days having dinners together and lunches together, and most importantly, walking through the olive groves in Corfu together. And what I noticed was something that I just talked to you about when I'm at the creek. Moore would stop every 10 feet in front of an olive tree and just look at the trunk for like 20 minutes. Now, if you know his work, you see what happened, how those forms influenced his work, natural forms. And so that's what interests and excites me, is how nature in the form of rocks, branches, trees, water, can transform into art, which I don't think is as special as a lot of people make it out to be, and which children and indigenous people usually do a lot better than artists, because they don't think of themselves as artists. They're just having fun. Or in the case of Aboriginal, indigenous painters, they're just drawing what they would like to be able to catch for dinner that day. You know, a bison maybe. And in the process, you know, their drawing is just beyond belief. It's like, forget about art school. They had it here. So, that, I think Mark might have a few chords to play.
There was something in that, for me anyways, that, well, first of all, if you guys have any questions kind of throughout any of this, feel free to raise your hands and ask whatever you want. I'll just say that we had talked a little bit about how we were going to do things, and then I wasn't planning on playing another thing that was unaccompanied by Philip, or not together with Philip, but there we were. And but something that he said, and he was talking about children and art, and there was something about the tone that I kind of discovered right there, and then the part that I was playing just kind of felt sort of it felt kind of innocent, and you know, to me it had the quality of, I don't know, what I imagine children feel like, you know, that kind of thing. And not that it couldn't be dark and dragons and rockets and machine guns and whatever kind of drawings kids sometimes do, but there was something in that, in what you said, that made me, that kind of gave me that musical, that was the sound I was going for when I imagined children doing artwork. You know, so I kind of heard that in my mind's ear, sort of your image there.
When I was in high school, a friend of mine invited me to come visit him in New York. I lived on Long Island. he said, I want to take you to a place where there's going to be some jazz. And I said, oh, I don't like jazz. I'm not into it. He said, come on, you know, this place called the Five Spot. I said, the Five Spot, okay. We went down some stairs there. I think it was like in the village. And as soon as we entered the space, which was filled with smoke, kind of like Kandinsky, I was just transfixed, transformed, and amazed. Because who I saw sitting and playing the piano was Thelonious Monk. And I had no idea who Thelonious Monk was, but I knew he was a giant. And so I never really thought about this until now, but a little bit like Kandinsky, that changed my life. Because I never heard music the same way, and I got how musical art is, particularly great art. And so I rushed the next day. I stayed over at my friend's house before going back to Long Island. And I went to the Metropolitan Museum, and I just made the rounds. Spent a lot of time in front of Matisse, and a lot of time just looking at the art from the second to the 20th century. And, you know, somehow Thelonious Monk allowed me to see all of that very differently.
Right, sure.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think he certainly, he played as if he heard things really, really differently. I mean, no one before or since sounds like Monk, you know. So yeah, and there's a certain license, I think, that comes with that as well. Like, you can do it this way, you know, which is like the audacity, right? And how outlandish, right? But it's also like, of course, you know, why do it the way someone else has already done it, right?
And then when we talked about space, you know, one of the things that struck me most deeply about his playing was the space, where he would just stop, it seemed like, for 5 minutes. And I thought, really? What is it? What's going on? Yeah. So you know, I have a lot of favorite artists. This one is de Kooning, Willem de Kooning. He was from the Netherlands. He came to the States when he was young, but he had already gone to art school in the Netherlands and learned all the proper way to paint a landscape and so on and so forth, and then he forgot it all in the presence of some great other European artists, namely Arshile Gorky, the great Armenian painter. And then, of course, these Fayum portraits, you see this? You can see them in every great museum in the world. And they were painted in the 1st and 2nd centuries by artists in Egypt. And there's a great dispute about, were they Egyptian? Were they Roman? Were they Greco-Roman? Who were these guys? Well, a dear friend of mine wrote a book about that, and it's kind of the final word in who these guys were. They were descendants of great ancient Greek portrait painters, none of whose work has survived because time obliterated it. But these guys who painted these Fayum portraits, the Egyptians thought, this is cool, we'll put them in the mummy cases and we'll bury them and we'll use them instead of the cartoon-like things that the Egyptians used to do. They started using these Greek portraits that were actually painted from life. And the reason we have them today in pristine condition is that they were buried with the mummy, the casket, in the warm, dry sand, and survived, you know, from the 1st century until now in pristine condition. And, you know, what I love, I mean, if you look at this woman's expression, there's something really timeless about it. It's not a portrait, it's beyond portraiture. It's a kind of a expression of what it is to be human. You know, there's a passion, there's a sadness, but it's all brilliantly done. So having favorite artists is important because they teach you. And tonight, or this afternoon, I'm learning from another favorite artist who I had never heard play. We've talked, we've gone back and forth, we're gonna do this talk together, and I had no idea what his sound was. And now I know, and you know. And so I feel blessed.
That's very nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, because I was thinking of, have you guys ever seen the film? I think it's called Lives of Others. It was at the Crystal a while back, and it was about the Stasi, I think it was called the Stasi, the East German secret police. And I had a similar experience with seeing that film that you did with hearing Thelonious Monk. It was kind of a pretty dark movie, kind of. It was about this officer, an East German officer, you know, and his job is to spy on people and turn them in if they are perceived as a threat to the state. And so he ends up, I don't want to give it away, it's a really good movie, so you should see it, so I'll be careful what I say about it. But I will say this, that he starts being really, it's not brutal, so, you know, you see him, you know, there's some questioning going on, things like that, and it's not like the brutal kind of thing that you wouldn't want to ever see again. But anyways, in one of his you know, espionages, he's spying on these people, and he's really moved by them, and I don't know if he's actually moved by. He's just really moved by them, and I'm not quite sure what he's. If you see the movie, we can talk about it. Let me know. Let me know. I'm happy to talk to you about it because I'm not quite sure what it was. But anyways, he gets really, really moved by it, and so it's just and so he has this big. You see this. You see that. You experienced that. And I came home from that movie, and I was just like on fire. And I practiced for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. And this was after the movie got out, right? So this is like, you know, well, it was probably 10 o'clock when I started practicing, you know. And it was that thing where something happened in one domain that stirred, inspired me in another domain, you know. And I wouldn't say it was synesthesia. And it wasn't like I heard, I'm not sure that I heard music, but there was some, I don't know what it was. I really don't know what it was, but it was just one of those things where you see something in one domain, and then you kind of, however that happens, you end up realizing it in another domain. You know, that's probably not uncommon. I mean, this is kind of, we talked about sort of art in everyday life or being creative, and you know, and you know, conversations could do that, right, with our neighbors, things like that, or you know, sometimes I'll get imagery from like people talking sometimes. You know, they'll be laying out an argument or saying something, and I'll get geometric shapes in my mind that, like, you know, dots and lines and triangles, and you know, they're typically two-dimensional, kind of like the classic Euclidean geometry stuff. But I think that occurs to me because I'm like, there's like emphasis on different parts of the ideas that they're laying out. I mean, it's totally unconscious for me. I'm not trying to create this. It just kind of, just sort of happens for me. And then, you know, when I'm playing music, when it's really happening, by that I mean when I just feel like the music's kind of coming through me and I'm just along for the ride, which is when it's the most fun, for sure. it's just like, you know, I'll hear something and it's like I'm tracing, you know, like paper. You know, you try and draw something as a kid, you know, you might put a piece of paper over some other picture, and then you can see the picture underneath it, and so you kind of trace it. And I'll do that when music's really happening for me. I'll do that in my mind. Like, I'll hear something, it'll just occur to me. I don't feel like I'm making it up. I mean, maybe I am. I mean, I must be. It's in here. So I don't know how it got there, but anyways, I'm just trying to like kind of trace it. I'm just trying to kind of follow that, you know, and you know, so it's funny because I was thinking about this earlier. Did you want to say something?
No, that reminds me of two things. One, there's a system of figuring out your personality type and in that system, my type is abstract random. So, for some reason, what you just said reminded me of a guy named Kyriakos. Kyriakos was a street cleaner. And when I lived in Greece, I saw him out the window. And when I saw him, something happened like what you described. And I said, this guy, I gotta paint this guy. And I invited him up. And I made a lot of drawings and paintings of Kyriakos. In most of them, you see him like this. Like looking out the window, and you think, oh my God, he's having a cosmic experience. Well, he was on the lookout for his supervisor. He was considered what do you call somebody who's not too bright and who is like like he's 35, but his mind is like a 12-year-old, like that. So they made fun of him. Kyriakos was the butt of many jokes. And we didn't talk very much, but when we did, what he had to say was riveting. In 1974, there was a coup, and that was the beginning of a 7-year dictatorship in Greece. The day before the coup happened, when the coup happened, students had been demonstrating at the Polytechnic Institute, and they were demonstrating against a really unfair government. And then the very next day, the tanks came to the Polytechnic Institute, broke down the fence, killed a lot of students. So the day before that happened, Kyriakos is standing there and I'm painting him for the umpteenth time. And he looks at me and he says, Kyrie Philippe, which means Mr. Philip. I said, yeah. He said, τι θα πει όταν βλέπεις αίμα στο όνειρό σου? What does it mean when you see blood in your dream? And I said, well, it could mean a lot of different things. And we woke up the next morning and there were all these dead students, and I realized, he was more than anyone knew. He was really seeing the future. Well, I think that somehow ties in with what you've been talking about. And the other thing that, for me, ties in with it is how I got here in the first place, which is that we were in Carbondale repeatedly over a period of months to test out a product that Michaela is working on for the schools.
Political campaign.
I was a political campaign. And anyway, I was in what's the name of the famous coffee shop here? Bonfire. So this is one of many drawing books with drawings of people sitting in bonfire, having coffee, working on their computers, etc. You can come look at them if you want. And the owner of the coffee shop says to me one day, "You should get together with, you should get together with Brian." And I said, "Who's Brian?" You know, and it was like right around the corner. And so that's how this whole thing happened, was that I got together with Brian. He said, "You want to have a show?" I was supposed to have shown these at the Bonfire coffee shop, and maybe one day I will, but there's really literally hundreds of them. And what sparked that was what you said about, you know, it was like, when I do these, I am not thinking. My hand is going where it needs to go. And that's it. And so that,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're tracing in a way. You're just kind of
Exactly.
Right from your retina, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And which is why I admire some of the greatest Matisse drawings, if you look at them carefully, and Picasso. He'll start at the elbow, and that line will go up the arm, up the neck, over the head, down the other arm, down the finger, one line. And you say, well, how did he do that? Well, he just followed where the crayon or the pencil wanted to go, needed to go. So it's, maybe that's it. Maybe that's what, we don't want to keep people here too long.
That's really neat. Does anybody, any questions, or does anybody want to share any of their own cross-domain art experiences or anything else?
Yeah. I was very, am I talking loud enough to hear? I was very interested in, just the whole concept of space, and it sort of feels like because of this COVID thing, we're in this massive space together, where we have this choice to reimagine things or to trace something different. And I personally have been working with schools lately, and what I'm finding is that teachers, my experience sometimes in the past talking to teachers was, they would go, "Oh, I know what I'm doing with this class. I could see that happening in a little space of a piece of the class, but not." And what I'm noticing is like everybody seems to be like a child. They're so vulnerable and open. They go, "Tell me more. How can we use this? What can we do?" I've never heard them respond in that way. So I don't know. I'm not sure what my question is, but I've just been thinking a lot about the idea of vulnerability, and that this whole thing, a lot of us feel sad sometimes, when we don't normally feel sad because we had something to put in that place, and now all there is a sadness or a loneliness or what do I do next? So I don't know, I was interested just to talk about the idea of vulnerability and what that role is in the creative process, because that's what I'm sensing is a level of vulnerability I've never seen before.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I think a couple of things. I'll get to your point in a sec. But I think that it's a real shift of priorities, right? You're like we aren't used to, So I recently stopped working at the school district. I did that for almost 20 years, and work has a way of kind of legitimizing your existence. I got work to do. I'm going to work. That's what I'm doing. And then when you don't have that. First of all, that you don't have that is kind of interesting, right? Like that you could have you could live your life without that. And then also, it's like, well, what do I care about, and what is interesting? And that's just been something that I've been, thinking about and grappling with at times. And one of the interesting things about the whole COVID thing is that, the silver lining for me is I got to spend a lot more time particularly with my daughter Renee, and then also Emily, because. We were involved in our lives that were largely disrupted, and then once that disruption happened, I was like, oh, we haven't spent this much time together in a long time. that's a really cool, you're a really cool person. Like, how did I miss that? You know, I mean, what happened, you know? And so, you know, I don't know, that's interesting. And, you know, the idea of Sir Ken Robinson, Tim sent me a talk that was really good. And he talked about creativity and how, just how important it is, and how, he didn't really say it's kind of beaten out of us, but in a way he did. Sort of the socialization that we get is, you know, we're supposed to do things in a certain way, you know. That's kind of how we're taught, you know. And so to do things in a certain way means that you're kind of discouraged from doing things in your own way, you know. And you know, you're talking about kids being, you know, free to kind of do their thing because they don't really know that they're not supposed to do that yet. You know, we haven't learned that. And so it was a perfect time to get that talk. I listened to it last night and again this morning. And he talks about, like, you know, you're not really, when you're really creative, you know, you're vulnerable, but you're also not, like, you're not afraid to make a mistake. You know, it's like, I'd be afraid to jump off the roof because I might land wrong. And there's a high cost to landing wrong. It's not that big a cost to landing wrong, though. I mean, I might really embarrass myself, you know, and even, you know, hopefully that wouldn't happen, and, you know, I'd get over it, you know. But that's like that. It's small stakes, you know, in terms of kind of the creativity, you know, what we're trying to do. But yet, when we pull it off, it's like super inspiring, right? I mean, that's just like, you know, it moves people, you know, and that's great, you know. I mean, I've been moved to tears by hearing somebody play one note, you know. It's like, whoa, where'd that, you know, it went right past my brain into my heart. Like, how'd that happen? I don't know, but my eyes are wet, you know. So that's a beautiful thing, right? So it's certainly a worthy endeavor, you know, even if we might embarrass ourselves if we make a mistake or whatever. So I guess I'll end with that.
Thank you.
One more song?
Could you play one more song, please?
Oh.
He has a question, though. He has a
Oh,
question.
question.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a plein air experience when you mentioned motion with the rocks. So here we are sitting, got a pretty stark, uninteresting, still building, and all around here were dancing trees, and then bring it down. So thanks for the enlightenment.
Well, yeah, I thank you, because that's exactly what I was getting at, and it's everywhere all the time now. It never stops.
Did you guys see the mouse scurry across? I'm like, I thought, what was that? And
Really?
it went past my amp, and I didn't see it come out the other side. And I'm like, oh, great, it's in my amp somewhere, you know. But it did come out the other side. I hope it did. I hope it didn't go back. I wasn't planning on playing another song, but I'll play another song. Held her fast until it came. Should've known she wouldn't stay. She wouldn't stay. She wouldn't stay. She wouldn't stay. Well, I got back on and I started to ride. Didn't wanna run, didn't wanna hide. Didn't wanna hide. Didn't wanna hide. Didn't wanna hide. Looked for her in the winter's chill when the spring winds came down. Looked for her by the riverbank. I looked for her in town. Rains came down. Rains came down. Washed her tracks away. Went back home and I dried my eyes. Looked inside, all I saw were homes. 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 I got like snow when I looked around, trying to tune into a new sound. With my heart unbound, my heart unbound, my heart unbound. Easy come, easy go. Why do they always seem to slip away? I don't know, but it seems they've gotta go before they can come stay. When will they come stay? When will they come stay? I don't know. Thank you.
That was the best one yet. That was fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Did you write that?
Yeah, I wrote that actually with my other daughter who's not here right now. The chords came, the music came at a camping trip, and then we both set off writing, and that's why there's two different choruses. I wrote one, and she wrote one.
I want to be able to listen to that. I want to hear that. That's really
It's really
good.
Oh,
pretty.
great. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, one last story. You see this one here? The reason I'm pointing to this is it's an 18th century Japanese
Oh,
painter named Taiga. Okay, Taiga had his buddies. He wasn't just Taiga. He had poets, musicians, other artists, and they hung out. And when there was a change of regime, it was very dangerous. You could wind up dead. So they would flee to the mountains, and they had a place in the mountains, you know, like a shack. And the musicians would play, which would inspire the artists to paint. And the poets would write poems, sometimes right on the paintings.
oh.
Yeah. And they drank a lot of wine. And as a result, Taiga, I don't know if it's as a result of the collaboration between these painters, poets, and musicians, but Taiga painted tree trunks in a way that no one in Japan had ever done before. And most critical, you know, people who saw it said, these are terrible, these are ugly, these are not tree trunks. Anyway, he just had a big retrospective at the Kyoto Museum, and the Japanese adore him because he invented something in a country where you always do this way, and you always play this song that way, and you know. And here are these guys hanging out in their cabin, painting, drawing, writing poems, and so he's one of my heroes. And so you brought that up for me. You know, I could just imagine myself sort of in one of these little, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've often thought it'd be really fun. I'm not quite sure how to pull it off, but like to really make it so that that really kind of get rid of the distance between the performers and the audience, right? And like have it like everybody gets together, and it's like, and we would do this actually. You know, we did it in Austin. We would play, or like my friend Mike was this great drummer. He loved to improvise, so we would just like play, you know, maybe just for hours, you know, without saying a word about what we're gonna play. We just kind of go. And he had two brothers. He's got two brothers, a bass playing brother and a guitar playing brother. And when one would visit, like a guitar player brother would visit, I'd play bass, and when the bass player would visit, I'd play guitar. And we would just have these jams for like 2 or 3 hours, but. We would then we would have like people over. Do you remember like Melissa and stuff? And we would paint, or you guys would paint while we were playing music. And I thought it'd be really, really cool to do that. Like let's have it's like a show or a concert, but it's like everybody participates, and you participate by, it could be dance, but it could be, you know, painting or writing or whatever, you know, and I'm not quite sure how to pull it off, but I've thought about it for a long time. I thought it'd be cool, so maybe we should try it again.
We'll talk.
Right on.
Thank
Well,
you,
thanks
guys.
everybody. Thank you.